I'm going to unmute you.
Yes, get this started. It's just a work meeting, so nothing too formal, but just like to recognize, thank Rachel for setting all this up. New Power Board Administrative Assistant, appreciate that. Those of you that haven't met her, and then Chair Dinsmore, appreciate you being here with your board members. You got Mr. Saunders, Mr. Hauser, and then Alderman Spriggs. If they come, I'd like to recognize Councilman Coates and stuff. Liaison from the council to the power board. Appreciate what you do there. So, Rick, we just turn it over to you and let you kind of run with this.
Yes. Yeah, Dave, have you seen UFS yet?
I'm here.
Oh, hi, Mark.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear that. I apologize.
Oh, you're good. You just popped up.
Oh, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
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 Oh,
We're
okay,
good.
good.
And so anyway, Mark is with Utility Financial Services Solutions, right?
Solutions, yeah. It's all right.
And he's actually done the rate studies for the city. This will be at least the third one that I'm aware of. You may have done more.
Yeah, since 2013.
Okay. And you have so far 4 of the 5 power board members in here, Mark.
Okay.
And all 5 of the council. The mayor wasn't able to make it with us, and Jeremy and Rachel. So as everybody's aware, there's been obviously some significant pressure on our power costs, and so when we had multiple months of that, we decided that it would be best to have UFS look into our cost of service and rates and review things and make recommendations. And that's kind of why we're here tonight. Is Mark will present their findings so far, and the plan is have a work session and then immediately following, we'll move into the council room for the power board meeting. If the power board's comfortable with the presentation and information, there's an item on the agenda to make a recommendation to the council to adopt or move forward with the rates that Mark's going to present. If not, if you're not comfortable, we can table that and schedule a meeting. So we'll just kind of see how things go. If we get approval from the power board tonight, it would be, I don't know if Jeremy's thought, if it's better on the 12th through the 26th council meeting is where we plan to do it. So, we'll just kind of go see how it goes, how the questions, what's your feelings, thoughts, ask questions. Mark's great at explaining things, so we'll turn the time over to you, Mark.
Andy's also.
All right. Well, thank you. Oh, go ahead. Was there a question?
Okay, we also have the other power board members on Zoom as well. It looks like.
Okay, good. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about the work that we've done. As I mentioned earlier, we've done work with Washington City since 2013. And I want to start by just telling you a little bit about our company. I know some of you may not be familiar with us. I'm president of Utility Financial Solutions, and we started in 2001. And we've done work in 44 states, including the islands of Guam, Barbados, Bermuda, several islands in the Caribbean. We teach the cost of service courses for the American Public Power Association, and as well as the financial planning courses. And we also teach for NARUC, the American Gas Association, and the American Water Works Association. Now, what I'm going to go through tonight is, can I go ahead and share my screen?
You should be able to. Dave's on and we'll help if there's any problems.
All right, there we go. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Okay, now as I go through the presentation, please feel free to stop me at any point and ask questions. I think it's real important that everybody understands what we're going to be going through, but I'm going to be discussing a long-term financial projection, and how we look at the financial health of the utility. And I'll be very honest, what you're going to see is a very financially stable utility, and we're not proposing any rate increases. We are proposing a certain amount of rate restructuring. When we look at your financial stability, from a debt to equity ratio, you're at what's called 9%, which is the industry average is 30, 35. You're well below, which means you're in really good shape. The age of your infrastructure is 38% depreciated. The average across the US, of course, about 50%, which means you have a newer infrastructure, which means moving forward from a cost perspective of what you actually have control over, it should be relatively stable moving forward. Obviously, there's other aspects of things that we don't necessarily have a lot of control over, and those are power supply cost. And one of the things I want to talk to you about is the power cost adjustment, how it works and why we have it. I want to show you a little bit about what would have happened had we not had the power cost adjustment. I do want to do some modifications to it, which I'll talk to you about. Now, what's happened in Utah and in Washington City is not unique. That's happened to a lot of other utilities in Utah. You're not anywhere near the worst in the U.S. I mean, we do work up in the Northeast, and because of, in a sense, an over reliance on natural gas and certain construction limitations that they've had increases in rates that have been approximately 40 to 50% for many utilities. Um, that even though I can say you're not in as bad a shape as others, it's still difficult. And of course, you have no control over things like the war in Ukraine or peak usage of utilities in your area that is causing increased pressure on market cost. But hopefully, we've seen the worst, at least for now, and we'll start levelizing. But no, there's no guarantees on that. But other than the power cost, you're a very financially stable utility. And the other thing we did is a cost of service study. And what a cost of service study is it identifies how much it costs to provide service to each class, compares it to the projected revenue from the class to identify if that class is meeting their cost of service requirements. And for the most part, you're relatively close there because of the PCA, which caused a change in your rates, your cost structure. We saw some little bit more variations, but I think those will levelize over time. But I'll go through the cost of service results. Then we have sample rate designs. As I mentioned before, we're not proposing a rate increase, and everything is revenue neutral for each class, but we are looking at some rate restructuring, and that's one of the things we want some guidance on tonight. I also want to give you a little bit of a glance into the future. And as far as what's happening nationally with respect to rates and the industry in general, and why the rates is a critical component to achieving situations where the customer has more control over their bills, help the environment, promote electric vehicles, creating a win-win in a sense for the utility and the customer. And I'm going to talk about this national landscape and what's happening around the US. And then, of course, the critical part of tonight's meeting is to talk about the next steps, the guidance on the rate design itself. So before I move on, is there any questions on what we'll be talking about? The next thing is when you build a long-term financial projection, in this case, actually our models go out 20 years, but we just show 5 years. It's built upon certain assumptions as to how costs are going to change. And of course, one of the key assumptions, if you look at inflation, let me Nice pointer here. If you look at inflation, last year was like 8.6%. In February, it was running at an annualized rate of 7%. The recent one that just came out had an annualized rate of about 6%. For purposes of our projection, we used a 5% average inflation rate for 2023. After that point, we feel, or in the projection, we assumed that inflation is going to go back closer to normalized levels, which is about 2 to 3%. That's the first assumption. The second one is growth. You're in a very high growth area. And we assumed approximately 3% annual growth. Then purchase power cost changes. And of course, this is what everybody's seeing, is that 49% increase in purchase power costs. Now, we're hoping those will levelize or come down. I think that you've already seen them come down to some degree. Although this is going to sound funny because it dramatically affects your customers, but from a financial projection standpoint, the changes in the purchase power cost do not affect our financial projections. And the reason is because power supply costs are passed through to customers. And so I want to talk about how we go about doing that to try to minimize impacts on customers as much as possible with those power supply costs. But right now, I think they are stabilizing and actually declining. Then you have your capital improvement plan. And the capital improvement plan is anywhere from 2 to 3, 4 million a year that we assumed in the projection. This is the capital plan that Rick had provided to us. Now, before I go to the financial projection summary, is there any questions about the assumptions we used?
I have a question. This is Dick Saunders. Reference the purchase power change. In 2023, we anticipate almost 50% increase from 2022.
Not
That was
anticipated, it's already happened.
It's happened. So to give a little bit point of reference, what did it look like for like the previous 5 years? We're projecting only 3% going forward. It just seems to me like it's like jumping off a cliff thinking that it's going to be that good of news.
I think Mark will have a graph that will kind of help show that a little. We have done some things, particularly for this summer. We've the Nebo project, we bought the gas at a very attractive rate. And so I agree with Mark. I think things are tempering and getting back to a little closer to normal. I would think realistically in the 3 to 5% range would be reasonable to expect. I mean, at least hopefully. I know in next year's budget, I'm showing on average cost per megawatt hour less than what we've experienced this current fiscal year for the same reasons Mark mentioned. So,
Okay.
The financial projections summary. This is the 5-year projection, and what it does is it summarizes 3 key financial targets that we look at. The first one is something called debt coverage ratio, which when you issue debt, typically electric utilities issue what's called revenue bonds. And revenue bonds they're secured by the revenues of the utility. And so they come with certain what's called bond covenants. And the bond covenants specified in the ordinance is 1.2 to 1.25, which means that you have to generate at least 25% more cash through your operations than what your debt service payment is. Now, that's a minimum. If you fall below it, you're in technical default on the debt. So, of course, we want to keep you above that. So that we want you to be at least a minimum of 1.4. Well, in your situation, it's not even a concern because you can see your debt coverage ratios are 5 to 6. So, you're only a 9% debt to equity ratio. In other words, you're very healthy. You don't owe that much money in debt. So that target is not a concern. Then reserves, minimum cash reserves. This is the minimum level of cash that we feel the utility needs to maintain to cover its working capital needs, and that's between 7 to 8 million. Now, again, that's a minimum. It's not a target. We want you to be above that. And when we look at your cash reserve projection, you're above it in every year. This is without any rate adjustments. All right. So those two minimum targets, in a sense, you're exceeding without any rate changes. We also have a third target, and this one's a little bit different. It's called a target operating income. And what this does is it identifies the maximum amount that we can recover. If we exceed the target operating income, we're theoretically overcharging customers. When it comes to setting rates, it's not an exact science. So what we do is we set a range, a target. So we exceed minimum coverage ratio, cash reserves, and our upper boundary is the target operating income. So when we set a rate track, we look to stay between those targets. And you can see without any rate increases, we stay right in between it. So financially, we're in really good shape. So is there any questions about this slide? Because this is kind of summarizes probably the biggest thing, which is whether or not you need a rate increase.
And I guess my only comment is, I mean, the customers, and maybe Mark, you can help me explain it, and I think you will. I mean, they're paying more because of the PCA and the power costs, not necessarily from the other operational costs from the utility. Is that a fair way to say it?
That is a fair way, yep. You see, when you look at most municipal utilities, even most investor-owned utilities nowadays, there's things that are beyond their control and things that are within their control. What's within their control is the local infrastructure. In other words, your distribution wires, your sub-transmission, and the labor and the materials that go into maintaining it. That you have control over. What you don't have control over is what happens in the power supply markets. Those are driven by things that are beyond our control. A lot of what we're seeing is because of the war in Ukraine. I know that's had a big impact because liquefied natural gas, for example, a lot of liquefied natural gas in this country has gone to Europe, which is driving up the price of LNG. And of course, we're seeing that in the markets, in the price of electricity. And without getting too detailed about markets, that's kind of one of the biggest factors that has affected it. But there's other things too that has affected the market price of electricity. But that's one of the more significant, more understandable ones. And that's the reason why we have that pass-through mechanism in the purchase power cost adjustment. Right. Now, I want to go through that minimum cash calculation because it's what we're trying to do here. And we're trying to make sure that you have enough cash in your reserves to fund the working capital needs of the utility. And what I mean by that is you may go all through the month of January paying for labor, materials, supplies. At the end of the month, you read everybody's meter, so to speak. And at the first week of February, you send out the bills. You don't get that money until the second or third week of March. So there's a lag time between when you actually paid the bills and you get the money back from your customers. So we look at what that working capital need is, and we look at your operation maintenance cost. And any utility that bills monthly, that working capital lag is about 45 days. And if you took 45 days divided by 365 days in a year, that comes out to 12.3%. And so we want to make sure that when we look at your operation and maintenance cost, that we have 12.3% of that in our reserves. Purchase power costs a little bit different. There's a working capital lag, but it fluctuates so much on a month-to-month basis that we want to make sure your highest purchase power bill is in your reserves at all times. I'm gonna come back to this one in a moment because that requires a bit more explanation. We want to make sure that your highest debt service payment is in your reserves and your capital improvement program, net of any debt issuances, that we have that in your reserves so that when you start your construction season, you have the money in your reserves to fund those construction projects. So then we have this number right here, this historical rate base. And because you have a newer system, 32% depreciated, what that implies to us is you have less of an exposure to a catastrophic event occurring. In other words, an ice storm, a windstorm, if you're in Florida, a hurricane, because you have that newer infrastructure. And of course, if something catastrophic happened, it could be something as minor as a transformer failing to a complete devastating ice storm or windstorm that could knock down a lot of your wires. And what we're trying to do here is to recognize that bad things happen. And so what we're doing to recognize it is we're looking at your total assets that you have out in service. And we feel because you're lower risk, we're taking 1% of those assets and putting it in your cash reserve balance. So that if a catastrophic event were to occur, you have enough money to at least start the repair and replacement process until financing can be arranged. And when we calculated, it came out to a little around 7 to 8 million a year, approximately. And again, that's a minimum. Now, is there any questions about this calculation? Because it is one of the more important ones. I do want to just point out one other thing. If you didn't have a power cost adjustment, we actually modify these because you have to have more cash in reserves when a PPA does not exist. So for utilities that don't have power cost adjustments, those minimum cash levels are a lot higher. But because you have a power cost adjustment, that minimizes your risk associated with purchase power cost. Is there any questions about this before I go to the cost of service study? All right. Now, a cost of service study, as I mentioned earlier, looks at how much it costs to provide service to each class. And it does that by looking at how customers use electricity. In other words, who's using electricity or what class is using electricity and how much during peak times of the day. Because that's when power costs are more expensive, when you have to pay transmission cost, or using up more of your power supply capacity. And we develop allocation factors to allocate those costs between each class so that, in a sense, it's for fairness reasons. Because you don't really want one type of user subsidizing others, theoretically. But with that said, there isn't a utility in the country that charges 100% cost-based rate. It's almost impossible. So what we try to do is to get close. And these results, what it does for us, it gives us direction in our rate designs. And if you look at like residential, it shows a need for a 6% increase. The average increase theoretically, that would be that to hit that target operating income is 1.7. That's only about 4.5% difference. So that's well within reasonableness. These two, this minus 9.4% for small commercial and minus 14% for large, the reason those are going so far negative, and it's a little different from the last study, they showed that they were actually pretty close to cost of service. It's driven because of the power cost adjustment factor. And without getting into too much complexity, there's two types of components that go into that power cost adjustment calculation. There's a transmission capacity cost based on your peak, and then there's an energy charge. And we're passing those costs on all in energy. And because of the way that they use electricity, these are showing a negative, but that will change once the purchase power cost adjustment changes, and we'll get those more in line. So the next part is the monthly customer charge, and this is one of the more key components because even though I'm not proposing a rate increase, I'm looking at somewhat of a rate restructuring. In other words, your current monthly customer charge for residential is $16.50. The cost of service study says should be about $20. And one of the questions for the board and the commission is to take this rate, move it up to the 20, but then lower the energy rate, specifically in that first block, because you have a tiered rate, and I'll show you this in more detail when I come to the rate design. But that's probably the key question or the biggest question I have for the board and council is what to do with the monthly customer charge. And I'm going to show you 3 different scenarios on that. So before I go to talk about power cost adjustment, is there any questions about the cost of service study?
They got a whole sea of numbers behind all what you see here, so.
Yeah.
So question, what would you consider still structure?
That is, I'm gonna call it a legacy rate that is strictly for SSI.
The business steel structures on.
Yeah.
Industrial.
And we'll actually address
There's more
that.
money than anybody else, that's why.
We're planning to phase out their rate or to remove it with this increase, with this change.
Restructure. We actually, nobody can find the original paperwork or anything about it, it just,
I mean, it dates back 30 years.
Yeah,
but why is it high?
the cost of providing that service is higher than what they're paying in their base rate, is what that means.
Can we go back to that? I just want to make sure.
Go back to the,
Go to the next slide, I think, Mark, if you can.
Sorry, what was that?
Can you go to the, I think it's the next slide. Is that one? Yep, that one. The other back. The one that's,
This one?
there we go.
Okay, so I'm just asking, so right now, they're paying $92.50 and you're saying we should charge them $120.
but it's just based on one meter. And so that's why we don't want to have a special rate for one customer. That is what that's saying, is that if we treated them,
But it says
as
cost of service.
in their 1 meter,
Can you go back?
they
Sorry.
are the same, but their cost would be $129 if we.
Can you go to the base rate slide there, monthly charge?
Because they both say the average, I guess it's average, it's 92.
They're being charged $92.50 right now, and so is large commercial. But if the cost of serving that one customer is actually should be a base charge of $129.53. If we were to true it up, is what it looks like.
Blend them into that overall rate. And it's not gonna change that number much.
But is it skewing the rest of the numbers? Is that why we chose to break it out, or is there a special reason?
They had a special rate for 30 years, negotiated rate.
This was back when the system was probably a year or two after it was bought, purchased. And at the time, they were gonna be this really big load. Would have tons of benefits to the city, and they just never materialized.
So now we're saying they should just be better, but now we're separating them again, so that's still
No,
going.
we're combining.
They're separate here because they do have a separate rate.
Okay. We're not to that next page.
Yeah, and we're gonna,
They're actually not a very large user in the scheme of things. There's no reason to have.
Well, I was just concerned that we're adding additional rate to one user for it.
No.
We're gonna combine them into large commercial.
and I think if you go back a slide that shows the revenues, Mark, or a couple slides, you can see they're $46,000 out of 26 million. So in the overall scheme of things, it's not gonna change things much.
you for that explanation. It's a good catch, really good catch.
It is something we should probably address. One of the things we looked at is the possibility of putting them into the large commercial rate, which is where they belong. But if we did that immediately, it would be a pretty large increase for them. And I'd probably, even though that would be my long-term intention, I think it might be something that you may want to do over a certain period of time, like say 2 or 3 years, because of because they would see a pretty good increase if we did that. So I just want to
Because of
caution you,
how
going too fast.
the rate was originally done for them and nobody could find the paperwork, they basically haven't had a rate change in 30 years.
Yeah.
So if we all of a sudden, so we've talked about how to figure out a way to work with them and transition them into be where they should be.
Their costs, their rates haven't changed, but their costs have gone up because they still get the power cost adjustment. So they do pay that.
It's just the base rate that's changing.
You have a base rate plus the power cost adjustment, yeah. And that power cost adjustment, I know sometimes it's very difficult from a customer's perspective, because of what's happened over the course of the past 10, 12 months. I would probably say that 75% of the utilities around the United States have some sort of power cost adjustment mechanism to pass those costs that are outside of their control to their customers. It's no different than like a purchase gas adjustment for a gas utility. But it is a mechanism for us to pass those on to one, help us to stay financially solid so we can provide a reliable service to them. And to pass on directly to customers these changes. Now, the biggest issue with power cost adjustments is how it's implemented. And I want to talk about that on the next slide. I'll show it to you, the methodology that we use or we are using, and the methodologies that are used by other utilities around the US. And that relates to this slide over here. If you look at this blue line right here, this is your actual change in your monthly power supply cost on a month-to-month basis. So you can see it going up and down. Some utilities calculate this monthly based on the previous months or 2 months before and pass it on. So what they see is this jumping around of their power cost adjustment. Now, several years ago, when we put this in place, we used what was called a rolling average method because we didn't want customers to see their bills dramatically changing from one month to the next. So this dotted line is the PCA that we've actually charged. So you can see that when purchase power costs went up, our costs went up, but not as much. And we slowly recovered it over time. So you see there's periods of time where we're charging less than our actual costs and periods of time that we're charging more. But we're trying to keep it stable over time. And when this jump occurred, our purchase power costs went up, but they didn't see that size of an increase. So, and of course, it's higher now because we're having to try to pick this part and this part up. So, and it's going to be a few more months before we actually start seeing a decline in the purchase power cost adjustment that is reflective of the more current market prices that have stabilized to some degree.
And that flat piece in there from September to November was when we held it to either 1.5 or 2.5 cents artificially. So it really should have had a more gradual transition instead of that flat, so that's where that shows up.
That's correct. Now, just one thing to note on that.
Yeah.
One of the things that helped us in that early period is we track because the methodology that's used is not perfect because there's always a timing difference. And so it doesn't match up 1-to-1 every month. So during this period of time that created that flat spike, what we did is we had over collected from our customers about $500,000 in this period. I can't write very well with this, so I won't do it. And so what we did is we took that 500,000 and we capped the purchase power cost adjustment until that 500,000 was used up. So that's what helped us stabilize it during that period of time. But we had to release the cap. Otherwise, cash wise, we would have had a tough time. So does that make sense what we did here?
Yeah, and we've had that discussion with both boards, so.
One of the things, just so you understand the importance of a power cost adjustment, is when we said, if you look at this orange line right here, that is your average power supply cost that's buried within your rates. Okay, and that's recovered in every kilowatt hour sold. And during the last 12 months, your purchase power costs were about 16.5 million. But when we set the rate, it was set to recover 10.8 million. So the PCA during this period of time recovered about $2.5 million in the last 12 months. And then we had the rollover from a previous period of 551 million. So we still have about 2.6 million of under recovered purchase power costs. So we'll recover over the next few months. But had we not had a PCA, our cash reserves would have depleted by 5.7 million. And it would have fallen below our minimum cash level and put us in a very tough situation to do our capital improvement programs. So, and this is one of the things is the reason why utilities have a PCA, because the number one thing, even though price of electricity is important, it's more important to provide a reliable service to customers, especially with something like electricity that, I mean, it provides not just convenience from the standpoint of watching TV, but it also is life sustaining, especially like I live in Michigan. So, with the heating, if we didn't have electricity to run our fans, we would have it'd be pretty tough up here. And air conditioning in your area, and I'm sure heat that it could have issues as far as life-threatening issues for customers. So the reliability is the most important. That's why most utilities have this power cost adjustment. There is one thing that we are proposing to do with it, though. Your projected PCA is about 5.9 cents for this year based on the projections. And we're proposing to take 2.89 cents of that and adding it to the base rates that customers pay, which will lower the PCA to 3 cents a kilowatt hour. It's not going to change a customer's bottom line bill, but it will change what's being recovered in the PCA itself. The reason we want to do that periodically, and it goes back to what I started to say when I was showing the cost of service results, is the power costs include more than just kilowatt hour cost when you purchase it. It includes demand and cost and transmission cost. And because of that, how customers use electricity affects if their benefiting in a sense from having it all on kilowatt hours, or if they're being harmed in a way. And that's why you see the commercials showing the need for a decrease. It's because of where that PCA is set. So by rolling this 2.9 cents into the energy component will help to fix or stabilize or get closer to cost of service for the commercial customers. So one of the questions I have is, even though that doesn't have a direct impact on a customer's bottom line bill, it just gets apportioned differently. But I want to see what you feel about trying to true up, at least to some degree, that power cost adjustment.
But Mark, there's a benefit to the power cost adjustment that we haven't talked about. And that's when the rates go back down, then the rate for the residents also goes down with it on the rolling 12-month average. So that's why we talked about not dropping the power cost adjustment to zero, because there's a good chance now that it will start to work its way back down. So the benefit of, we can recover the costs when they go up, but we also give them back to people when they go down. So if we were in an environment where they were going down, this will automatically give those back. And that's why we left it at 3 cents.
I think it was in 2021, I have to look for sure. PCA was actually negative for a couple months, not a lot, but it did go negative slightly for a couple months. So
We anticipate power rates going down with all the closure of, coal plants and infrastructure kind of being depleted clear across the United States.
I'll put it this way, I hope that they'll come down from the crazy months we've had in the last 6 months, which is what's caused that significant increase in the PCA. And like I say, our average cost, I think, for last fiscal year was just under 13 cents.
Yeah.
And in our next year's budget, I think I have 10 3/4. So yes, I'm hoping that it's not going to go back down to the 7 cents that was shown here when that was done 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I don't really see us getting there, but I'm optimistic that we shouldn't be at that. We should be in the middle of those two.
So that's where the last year was an anomaly. Basically, is kind of what we're banking on.
I think it's an anomaly that we need to keep a close eye on, and we can very well have Mark look at this next year at this time too. I think it's something, it's so volatile. I don't think going 5 years between these kinds of studies is going to be the norm anymore. I think we need to look at it on at least every other year, if not an annual basis, based on how things are going.
I think the concept of banking on it, it's what we're projecting, but with the PCA, we don't have to make that guess. We can put it up and down as it
And more stable.
yeah. And so with the 12-month average, it goes up a little slower, but it'll also come down a little slower. So hopefully if it does come down, we start to see that in those rates, but we don't have to guess where we think it's going to be and try to set rates to vote. We can adjust it to the 5, to the 3, and then let it go up and down from there, but hopefully it goes down. I hope.
Yeah, so the crazy September and December and January they're gonna linger with us the next roughly 9 months, the impacts of those really high months. So,
Didn't we use one-time funds to cover our reserves?
well, we've approved that would come, but that's gonna be kind of part of the natural budgeting process.
It'll true up the company at the end of the year. Okay, so you've approved for us to use $1 million to true up at the end of the year, so that we don't have to go back and collect that from customers. We can take a fund, what we call our rate stabilization fund, which is what we save to help stabilize those, so that we can do the best we can there. But
And we'll be bringing a budget amendment probably next month, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
That will reflect our refine current best guesstimate of where we're gonna end up in this next 2 months, so.
Yeah, it's a little hard to forecast when we're getting snow and.
Yeah, Mark,
Summer and May.
we just had a little bit of a snow squall go through here, believe it or not. As we were
Oh,
talking,
really?
so. Snow in April in St. George is unusual.
Yeah, not in Michigan. So
So as
that
far
is
as-
one of the, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, as far as the concept to do that shift, I think it makes sense. Again, you think that original base rate was set 6 years ago.
Yeah.
So it makes sense to bring it up into the closer realm of what we're projecting. And you'll see it in a
Yeah.
little more detail here.
Which kind of you're going to see it in the upcoming slides here when I go through the rate design options. Now we're proposing, so especially on the residential, but even on the commercial, we're proposing 3 different options for consideration. All of them for the class are revenue neutral. In other words, they're not going to increase the revenues. Some customers may see slight increases, other ones slight decreases. But the class in total will not see any changes. So these are all set at 0. Now, on the residential side, you see that down here, you see the purchase power cost adjustment, the 5.889. We're lowering that to 3 cents. We're projecting it to be 3 cents, and we're reducing it by about 2.9 cents. So we're taking that and we're rolling it into these energy components, all right, to recover it. Now, scenario 1, we're proposing taking the customer charge from 1650 to 1750, and then using that additional revenue to lower the energy rates. So if you were to look at the first block rates, they actually slightly decreased. Then if you go to scenario 2, the second option, we propose a $2 increase in the customer charge, and using that again to lower the block 1 energy rates. Scenario 3 is going right to cost of service on it, but and using that again to lower the first block of energy. Now, of course, these are just numbers. It's more important to look at this slide, which actually shows the impacts at different usage levels. So here is the number of kilowatt hours used. So for a customer that used 350 kilowatt hours a month, just for reference purpose, the average is 850. Under scenario 1, they'd see $1 increase in their bills. Scenario 2, $1 increase. And scenario 3, $1.63. But if you look at the average customer, which is 850, under scenario 3, they'd actually see a reduction of 78 cents a kilowatt hour. And this is one that in looking at this, because of the way we structured our rates, the average customer is actually going to see a slight reduction. Now, the importance of setting the customer charge higher up here and using that additional revenue to lower the first block of energy, what that does is 2 things. One, when you have seasonal customers are only there part year, basically, if you're charging less than $20 a month, you're actually undercharging them, and that has to get picked up by your year-round ratepayers that can't afford a second home. And by setting the customer charge higher at the $20, we're charging those seasonal customers more appropriately and fairly. And we're also charging the year-round customers more fair, because we're giving them this increase back in the first block of energy. And it's the year-round ratepayers are going to be using more energy in that first block. So one of the things that we're asking for is we put together three options. But from a staff perspective and UFS perspective, we feel scenario 3 would give the best results for Washington City. Primarily driven because most customers are going to see a slight rate reduction. And that's one of the first questions on the rate design we have. The second one, before I move to the small commercial, I should probably back up, see if there's any questions or discussion about the residential.
You're gonna see a rate increase just in general, like just overall dollars will be paying more though. Because we say it's a reduction, but really we're charging them more for the base rate, but reducing how much they charge. So if they use less power, they'll get less, but if they use the same, potentially it could be more.
If they're in that 850, they'll actually see a 78 cent decrease. Yeah, if they're using 850.
But what is that type of home is that? Is that like a
Chill average.
2,500 less?
Well, our average, I mean, if you take the kilowatt hours sold divided by the number of customers. This time of year, we're probably in the 500-600 range, and during the summer in the 12 to 1,300. We're kind of, I think, unique. I think I said it in our last review with these guys. We don't have a lot of average customers. We've got people with really big homes, and we've got a lot of apartments and smaller homes. So does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so the average comes in, but you're gonna have, I think, a lot of the two extremes as well.
I don't know if I say this in an open meeting, but we're probably more concerned about the lower usage customer because they're likely less able to make the payments, right? Did I say that in the right way? The person who's using 3,000 kilowatts probably can afford to pay for 3,000 kilowatts. That makes sense.
It does. I just want the council to know, I think a lot you're gonna hear about the people that way that are gonna pay, our rates are gonna go up because now we're locking them into another. Brett's gonna see it.
Yeah, they're gonna
Well-
see the $20 price versus 16.
So
I'm not even really.
Broken out that way, right? Because you just can't do charge. So that's how it's calculated, but it doesn't matter.
But it doesn't calculate. We're raising the base rate, so we're lowering the power consumption, but is it just so we have the more money guaranteed?
No, it's so that we,
It aligns with the cost of service better.
yeah.
Yes. Primary reason.
So in effect, you're charging people for the system that has to be here, whether or not they use a kilowatt hour, right? We still have to have the lines, still have to have the transformers, we still have to have everything ready. So we talked about that second home user, and we don't have millions of second home users, but that person still ought to pay for the lines, the lineman ready to help them in case it goes out. And then if they come and turn on that television, they start paying for the kilowatt hours too. It's just a more fair way to make sure that they're paying the fixed costs and the variable costs properly.
And as far as the base charge, just a little bit of perspective, that's the one area that we are lower than the surrounding. St. George just raised theirs to 25, and I think Dixie's is 29. So.
Yours is 29, did you say?
Dixie's is. Of course, their energy charge is much less, but. Savings. So if you use the same amount compared to our current structure and PCA to proposed structure and PCA, the larger users would actually see that slight increase.
how would that affect somebody in a
Slight
small?
decrease. If you look at scenario 1 right here, which is the 1750, what that actually does is the large users see a bigger rate reduction. 6.27 cents a month, $6 a month reduction. Under the $20 increase on the customer charge, they only see a 78 cent reduction. So this actually has a more of a benefit to an average residential. So if you look at like a small apartment that might use 500 or 600, under scenario one, they are going to see $1 a month increase. Under scenario three, they're only going to see 30 cents. If they use in the summer, as Rick had said, say 1,300, they'd see $1 increase here and a 78-cent reduction here. So it's a $2 difference in the summer. So both of those scenarios kind of benefit the smaller or average type customer. The only one it harms is if you start getting into below 350, which would be just to maintain a home, you're probably going to use over 300 kilowatt hours a month. Who that's going to affect primarily are going to be seasonal customers and customers with solar on their roofs. They're the ones who would be in that 300 kilowatt hour range.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions? Because this is obviously your biggest rate class by far. And you know, we're as a staff and UFS, we're leaning towards scenario three. Obviously, that's the board and council's decision. You know, we feel that scenario three provides the best balance to the residential customers than the other scenarios do.
And can you just touch base briefly, the solar buyback rate effective, that would be basically going from the 4 cents to 6 points.
Yes, good point. Thank you, Rick. One of the things right now we're giving a 4-cent credit for energy given back to us by solar customers. We're actually proposing to increase that to about 6.9 cents. So solar customers, for energy they get back, we're actually going to be paying them more. But we may be taking some of that back by the way we structure the rates, because they might get $1.63 a month increase on that, but they would get more value for what they do send back to us.
Rick, I think some clarification. I think when I heard the last couple of questions that council have asked is, are people's rates overall, they're going to stay about the same? Going to go up a little bit or up a lot? I mean, it's just very layman terms.
As far as the
Yeah.
bottom, the way he's structured any of these scenarios, if you use the same kilowatt hours with the rate and PCA added together, it will be the same.
Yeah.
Except for these little minor adjustments here.
Yeah.
But basically, you're gonna be within $1 or $2 of what you're currently paying today.
The total bill or total?
In your total bill comes down.
So how does that help us? Layman terms, yeah, right? Like, we're sitting here seeing that we need to add increased costs. And you're saying it's not gonna change.
We're not, we're just adjusting the way they're calculated. We could leave it just the way it is and it would collect the same amount that it's collecting right now, but if we raise the customer charge, the base fee, and we lower both the PCA and we'll increase the rates and lower the PCA. Just how it's calculated, but we'll collect the same amount of money. But it's more true to the way that, so people that are using it, the way that they use it will be billed properly. Does that make sense? Like you said, not every customer will see a $1 or $2 difference. Some will see more and less, but on average for the entire class, it's a couple less. So.
And I think we need to,
sense there.
well, I think we need to make sure we understand that PCA is part of our rate structure. It's not a separate animal. It's part of the structure, and so I think it's.
But what it's, so I'm gonna say what I think I heard from Jeremy is the fact that if you're an excessive user of power, your power bill is probably going up. And if you're not, your power bill could potentially go down because of the way it's structured, because before it was more heavily weighed toward the usage. And now we're saying it's not as heavily weighed toward the usage, it's more of a base rate. Am I right? Right, make everyone else more confused.
I guess maybe a little bit. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, if you look at like this rate, it's currently on the excess block over 1500. It's 13.2. What we're doing is we're taking that 2.889 cents and we're rolling almost all of that, most of it, not all of it, into block 3. Under this scenario, we're rolling all of it into this rate. In other words, if you took 13.28 cents, added that 2.9, you'd come up to approximately this rate, the 16.169. So they're actually not going to see a rate reduction from the true up of the power cost adjustment. They're going to see the same rate in a sense. It'll go back to this chart where they would see a 78-cent reduction right here. But under scenario 1, they'd see a $6 decrease.
It's gonna true up the fixed costs and it's gonna provide a scenario where power conservation is rewarded, right? If that third block is where the higher rates are, you're gonna wanna stay in the first or second block, or maybe you choose to.
That's not what that graph says. So can you go back to where you were?
This one here.
There's a reduction of $6.27 for the high user.
If
In scenario 1.
So if we say, if we say scenario 1, say we do that, so we're saying the high user gets a better break than the low user.
that's.
If we stay the same.
We're recommending scenario 3.
Yeah, I just want to be clear about it, because that's why I'm seeing that saying, why would we?
I mean,
this,
If
the
we
higher
want,
user?
we could have him do the same thing and raise the third block up and lower the other blocks.
Correct.
I'm
Under
not
the
saying
class,
that.
that will be revenue. It'll never.
Yeah, that is another option. Absolutely. We could bump this even higher. And I'd still like, if council's okay with it, still like to increase the base rate to 20, but use this additional revenue from this block to lower that first block even. And that's a legitimate, that I think would be a great option if the board or council wants us to do that.
Is there an option for a fourth block, and there's in between the 1500 kilowatts to maybe, I don't know what those ranges are. So you would keep that 0.16 cents at the block 3, but the block 3s are range from 1501 to 2501. I don't know what that equates to, and then you have an excess that's really high. I don't know.
No, that's another good option. We could take and say, okay, block 3 is between 1501 and 2500. Anybody after over 2500 would pay an even higher rate than this. And we can do that also. The only thing, we don't have the billing data on it, but I don't think it's that much to really worry about. But we can definitely do that.
He looked at his August bill and he was like 1463. And I mean, I don't want to hit like, I would call Ben
to his highest usage.
because I don't want him to pay this ridiculous cost, but if his highest usage in August is within that 2500, that's still within norm.
Well, he's still within block 2.
Block 2, yeah. But I guarantee my house, the way my wife keeps the air conditioning on in the summer, I'm gonna be in block 3, and so there's 4. I might be in block 4, I don't know. I'm just saying, but there's gonna be some users to the north, and I'm not trying to, I don't think we should penalize people who are doing that, but maybe people who are way excessive, and I don't know what that number is. I don't know what your guys' thoughts are.
Well, we can set that block 4 to go. In other words, block 3, maybe we go up to like 5,000. And then anybody over the 5,000 will get the higher rate. That's an option also.
To see how much we're even talking about, whether we're making another class for Cause we may not have a lot of users that go that way.
Yeah, it'd be good to have some data on
Yeah, but also.
how many users are in each block.
Then you're gonna hit those high users really heavily, their bill would go up a lot.
And we're talking commercial.
No, this is just.
This is just residential.
But one of the interesting things to look at is sometimes your highest users aren't your biggest houses. They're your. Or the ones that are insulated as well, and they're running swing seniors with teenagers.
Teenagers.
And so what we found is that isn't necessarily your biggest homes. You sometimes hit your older people with less insulated or people who don't have good systems.
Yeah.
So
It's just an idea. I don't know if we should.
we can run some data before.
Yeah, if that's something that both boards want us to look at, we certainly can. And again, I think, you know, part of my objective was to implement these changes prior to summer. But in reality, like we said, basic costs are the same either way. It's more or less, I don't know if you want to say how it's presented, or because you've got the, you know, this comes off of here, but goes into there, right? And so in the end, so I from a money standpoint, I think I'd rather get it right, that everybody's comfortable. And, you know, so I don't have a problem with that at all, if that's the way.
There's no need to go really fast, is what you're saying. We're not losing.
Correct. I mean, if we were losing, you know, falling behind $1 million a month or something, I'd be a little more stressed about it, if that makes sense. I think where it does come in is when we get in those higher months, people have started to focus in on that PCA line item on their bill and say, what is this? And they think it's an extra thing that we've just recently added. They don't even realize it's been there for 6 years.
So in a way we should reformat the way our bills look, so it's not confusing. Or is it
At one point, we talked about making it all just one rate. But I believe it was the council that wanted the PCA separated. Was that right?
Yeah, I was, you know, when I first started, they'd adjust it and it was just a dollar amount. It didn't break the PCA out, but there was a sentiment that felt like that ought to be a separate line item, and so we did that in the building.
So that line item was $2. It didn't make as much difference if it's.
So how does that show on the statement?
It
What
was say
statement are you looking
PCA.
for?
I was sure.
Express.
So that's the downfall with Express, is it doesn't always give us only so much limitation on Express. So when you get your actual paper bill, it does show the PCA.
I'll be honest, if I could opt out of that,
I'd say,
I would totally opt out of that.
Maybe there should be an incentive for that.
16 cents.
So is that something I think it sounds like we wanna kind of maybe break out of our 10,000 customers in August? So many were in this block, so many in that block, so we can at least get an idea.
Is there any way that we could actually show dollar figures of, you know, rather than these small percentages or whatever, such and such had a bill like this, give us an example.
Yeah, we could.
At this one, it would,
Yeah.
you know, so we know lower income and. Or,
So look at actuals. You could look at
yeah,
actual.
it would help me to
1,200 square feet.
better see it, but
Um,
yeah.
I'll tell you what, I could possibly do something similar to that right on screen here. If let me just change this increment. So what I did here, this is the different scenarios. Let me hide these two so they don't confuse us. What I did is I increased the range. Okay, so this is the same scenarios that I was showing you, but you see that scenario 1, and this is scenario 3. Now, if we go up here, I can't create a block 4 because I don't have the billing determinants on it. But I can show you on screen if you want to see any variation you want to see as far as the customer charge, these blocks, or the PCA. I don't know if there's any scenarios you'd like to see. Like I said, I can't do a block 4 because I don't have the billing determinants. What I could do though is to show you what would happen if, let's say, in this excess block, which is 1500 and over, let's say I add a ½ cent a kilowatt hour. What I can do then is, see, go to data. What if goal seek, set that cell to 0 by changing this.
He does this magic all the time. Just let him do his thing.
That's close. So what that would do then, if you look at the impacts, under scenario 3, they actually see a rate increase. That's over 1500. So there's a lot of different options that we can, I think what the direction I'm hearing is you would like to see the larger users actually go up a little bit and basically try to use that to benefit more of this range right here, which would be more of a typical customer. Would that be a correct statement?
I want to hear from Power, what you need it.
I personally think it should just be as fair as possible. I like the idea of second home users paying more, but I think that's fair.
Is there a way to identify the second home versus a primary home in use, just in usage?
And it would be, I mean, it would come, you know, if we did it that way and raised it to 20, then that would automatically do it because everyone pays that regardless whether you're full time or not.
We also don't let people just turn off all of their use, right? They can't just come and say, turn my electricity off, I don't want to pay anything for the next 6 months. They have to pay the base charge. And then if they don't use any kilowatt hours, that's when they'll just pay the $20. We reach that. I kind of agree with Todd. I think we go too heavily to use their users. I think we're going to create a problem for ourselves.
No, you're gonna hear some complaints.
We want it to be
There's more
fair.
savvy,
We want it to be fair.
yeah.
Well, I think a slightly different approach might be, and Mark, you can chime in, this is just thinking off the cuff. I mean, you could increase that second block window. Instead of up to 1500, make it go to 2000 or something like that. That would cover more people to stay in the 2 blocks, but you gotta recover those costs from somewhere. So, and maybe if we do the statistics and we'll see what magic Brittany can do. Cause she has her pivot table and does all kinds of neat stuff. She might be able to help us provide a little better background information of what our customer makeup is. Like I
Rick,
said,
can you talk about what taxes there are on this? If there's any special taxes, or I should know on my bill. But
is there, I think it's called the energy usage tax, and it's the same no matter.
It's a straight percentage.
Yeah, it's a percentage.
base rate or anything, it's just the.
Tax and the sales tax.
I'd have to ask Brittany for sure. I don't know if it's part charged on the base rate or just kilowatt hours.
It's charged on all of it.
On all of it.
So Todd, are you leaning towards just having not the tiered charges, but have everybody just the $20 per month and then everything else is the same per kilowatt hour?
Yeah, I kind of like the 3, block 3,
Not the way you're thinking.
We don't want a single
Yeah,
block.
it's here.
Yeah.
Here's still.
So you're liking the block 3 just the way it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
that's kind of where I'm leaning
With the $20 base.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
I don't think there'll be too big of a difference that people will see and you know. And I honestly, I don't understand it completely. I mean, a lot of it is, but just what I do understand, that's what makes the most sense.
Well, I think that's why we're asking for actuals. We want to see what
Right.
we actually get place when we get done.
We can pull some actuals and show, you know, a 1,200 square foot house, pull actual data. We won't tell you whose house that is or whatever. We can pull each of yours.
I like seeing when you see the block report option too.
I like that.
Doesn't show me that only have.
So are
Both blocks that way.
We can look at an option of the same house that has this scenario and then show the option for and see what happens. And pick demographics from Old Town to Copper Green Springs.
It is.
Yeah.
Kind of a real high user will pick a. fix their user.
I've done it in the past and I said, this is a house that would look extremely similar to your house.
We'll show you my usage of the kilowatts and you'll be blown away.
Well, we're gonna have to go.
That is yours higher and mine higher? I think mine.
I know yours is higher, I'm just saying, my kilowatt usage is more.
One of the reasons you want the blocks is we do want to encourage conservation. We do want to charge more, cost more as they go up, so people have incentive to reduce their
Well,
consumption.
and we have seen that just in general. I mean, I spoke with a lady last week and she was talking to me about it. And she's like, yeah, I told my kids 15 years ago, yeah, it's gonna be hot in the summer here. Too bad.
It's gonna be a
She was wanting to do the power race, but she had already in her mind established that it's gonna be hot from this month to this month. You guys just need to work it out with her kids. And I laughed about it.
She said, well, people do that. They use their consumption base, and that's what we want, right? Because that last kilowatt or megawatt of power costs a lot more than the first megawatt.
Yeah.
And so we do want, and even, we can even say this out loud, but even solar helps us if people want to go that route, because it takes that last megawatt that we have to purchase off of the end. And we didn't talk about that. We want to talk about that before he finishes up the solar rate, right? Could we?
Yeah, he touched on it briefly.
mentioned it.
Yeah, it would basically go from 4 to, yeah, just under 7 is what the basic proposal is. So,
I think you'll see more people interested, and those who have solar will get a little bit better. Yeah. But it's more based on avoided conflict of power, the benefit to the system that their solar provides.
and I think the inclining rate makes sense because that's how, I mean, in summer where people weren't concerned, we wouldn't have to buy as much expensive power, so.
Make the power cheaper.
I wish it could.
In Washington, Utah.
Yeah, let's do that. Can we prove that?
We don't have water wells.
Yeah, we know, we should do all that.
Sorry, Mark.
What do you mean? It was just.
So we'll do some. And he still has the commercial to show and some other things, but we'll work on. Some, I don't know, demographics, metrics, whatever you wanna call it, maybe different breakdowns of our users, how many fall into different blocks. And then at least you might have a little better idea of how many fall in, you know, where they're little small users and how many are the real big ones.
Yeah, so that and the fourth block.
And maybe an option looking at a fourth block.
Whenever we do this, we did this when we did the water analysis, it blew us away who was high users and who wasn't. And we didn't put names, we just had a picture. And it's blowing me away how much water uses.
Data was very telling.
It was telling, because we were discussing. And you have someone with a pool and they have their usage, and you have someone with grass and they hate.
Yeah.
Cause we thinking pools might be more, and they historically weren't, we were kind of like, but then all of a sudden you had one that totally was, so it just depends. Everyone lives a little different.
Looks like we've got some homework on the residential side, Mark, and then we will obviously coordinate with you.
Okay, perfect. Now, the small commercial, again, we ran 3 scenarios. Um, for you to consider, one is taking the customer charge from 22.50 to 25.50. And then, or to 27.50 or to 33.50. Now, of course, whatever we set that at, it means that the energy rate would actually be lower. You can see this is 9.19. Over here, it's 9.6. The demand charge, which is the peak usage a customer creates every month, we're keeping that pretty much the same, 1072 to 1075. You can see that the impacts, which is based a little bit different metric, it's called load factor or usage pattern. A higher load factor, which would be more of a like a more consistent user or 24-hour a day operation, they're going to see virtually no change or slight rate reductions. A customer that does not have a good usage pattern, they're going to see some slight rate increases as much as a 3%. Well, nobody has 0. More realistically, it's like 25. The biggest increase would be around 2%. But we didn't really have a solid recommendation on this one. Although when I look at the large commercial, one of the things, we only ran 2 scenarios. Scenario 1, we're taking the customer charge because these are larger users, they wouldn't even notice this increase to $100. Because they may have a bill of $1,000, that $7.50 is pretty small. But here again, in scenario 1, we kept the demand charge the same. And the energy charge pretty much is the same also, and they're really not going to see any significant change in their bill. Under scenario 2, we did increase the demand charge a little bit, and we used that additional revenue to lower the energy rate. So that would be the red line here. So a larger, more efficient users would see a little bit of a rate reduction under the scenario 2. As far as a recommendation, I would probably recommend scenario 2 and scenario 1. And so in other words, if I could make a recommendation, it'd be scenario 1 here and scenario 2 here. And the reason I'm making that recommendation is if you look at this energy rate of 9604, it's the same as the energy rate here. The only variations is the demand charge and the customer charges. The reason the customer charges are more expensive on the large commercial, it's primarily driven by the metering package. It's more expensive metering that's required on these large commercials than it is on the small commercials. And that's the reason why the higher customer charges. So again, neither one has any kind of significant impact on customers. I mean, some might see some slight increases or slight decreases, but most are going to fall right between a revenue neutral amount. So I don't know if you have any comments about the large and small commercial.
How many large commercial clients do we have? The 400?
I'll tell you in a moment.
Mark, on the small commercial, why would you not do scenario 2 where we give them the advantage of the rate for only $2?
Let's see.
Revenue sheet.
Scenario 2, which is 9507, I'm just increasing the customer charge a little bit more dramatically. And I mean, that is a definite option. The only reason I propose option 1 was to keep that energy rate the same between the small and the large commercial. That was really the only, we don't have to do that. That's just, I just like that consistency, but there's no real reason other than that.
Okay, and I can understand why current to scenario 3. I was just looking scenario 1 to 2, but I didn't look at current to scenario 2, so okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right now, last month we had roughly 425 small commercial and about 125 large.
Yeah,
That
sounds about
includes
right.
things like that.
Yeah, 476.
Large. It's gonna be like
I'm just
your
got 14 on the large, yeah.
lots.
Gas station.
Farmer Street, Culver's.
That's generally the break is about 30 kilowatt a day. That's probably
Your house.
We have a ton of power now.
Yeah, I would expect.
I haven't seen it come across transferring revenue, but we might.
We play with that. We always try to keep it in the smaller if we can, but we kind of. Years ago, we worked on how we phase our power turn on just because we kept kicking us that larger.
Yeah. And I do it off of an average now, instead of like twice a year. If you hit that 30 for the demand, I do an average of 30 for the whole year now. That's how Brittany and I came up with it. So that what deciphers if you go into some, if you go into large.
And there's not dramatic difference. I mean, there is some obviously, but it's not huge.
Okay. There's a couple more things I'd like to cover. One of them is the commercial EV rate. This is a new rate. And we developed it based on the cost of service for this class. And one of the things we're looking at is having a demand charge of $5.42 and an energy rate of 10.8. And the reason why we want to lower the demand charge is the way that commercial installed charging stations use energy, their usage pattern is not very efficient. And if we were to put them on this large commercial rate, that would have a really adverse impact on them. And so we looked at just the distribution infrastructure that we're trying to recover in this demand rate. And it's more indicative of cost to serve them. And the reason it is, without getting too technical, is in this class, I forget the average load factor, but I think it's around 50% load factor, which is the ratio between the peak demand and average demand in the course of a month. But when you look at this one, it's more like 5%. And what that means is there's more diversity within the load. In other words, when your system peaks, say hypothetically it's 7 o'clock in the evening, there's more probability that this class is going to be using energy at that time, or more of their energy than this class, because the probability of a 5% load factor actually using energy at the time your systems peak is the probability is greatly reduced. So we're trying to take that into account so that we don't overcharge the commercial EV charging stations. And right now, I don't believe we have anybody on this.
We have one Electrify America station currently.
Okay.
But we're starting to see a lot of people wanting to add it to their restaurant or their car dealership or.
Is that per station or is that per business? Those charges per meter.
And what I would propose, this would be applicable to those that are basically a fueling station, not, let me back up.
Be
So
separately metered. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, they'd be separately metered from their normal business function. You know, we've got a few, like Maverick has a couple small ones, the motel does. I don't know if they just let them use it or if they charge them for it. I'm not sure what the motel does.
Those I'm not so concerned about, and those are what's called level 2 charging stations. And their peak that they can create is like what's called is 19 kW, which is going to kind of mesh with their usage. So I'm not so concerned about that. What I am concerned about is what's called DC fast charging stations, which when those get installed, they can be 300 or 400 kW per station because they charge the cars really quick. And of course, those are the ones that I really want to be separately metered and to be definitely on this rate, if that makes sense. It's because that demand component is quite large.
And I think the only fast chargers we have are the Electrify America one.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of any others. There could be one somebody snuck in.
We have a couple proposed, there's nothing in the tree. What's that?
It's the only tree they promised me. Right there.
Yeah. Good luck.
So, I mean, does everybody, do they have any concerns of moving or creating a EV charging station rate?
Charge double.
I need to be a little bit more aggressive on it.
Here's,
Aggressive to attract them or aggressive to recover car costs?
to recover costs from it.
So you're saying
Yeah, that's
maybe
great.
a charge on that app, not to the guy putting it in, but the person that is using it.
Yes. Well, they set that rate. They set that.
Yeah, I know, but you do that by charging.
They set that right based on what they're, yeah.
I mean, unless the city wanted to get into that business, which I don't want to.
Does this recover costs for these customers? What's that? Hurricane's looking at.
Did you hear Jeremy's question, Mark?
Business and then charging.
No, I didn't.
I said, does this proposed rate cover the cost for this class of customer with that demand charge?
Yes.
The demand charge could be. What is a typical demand number that you see in something like that? Is it a 30 or a 40 or higher? Let me turn that on.
If it's a level 2 charging station, it's usually the max pull draw is 19.2 kW. But those are not the ones I'm concerned about. It's the fast chargers that the DC fast chargers can be 350 kW per station, even higher than that. And a lot of times there's 8 ports in every station, so that's like 2 megawatts or 2,000 kW. And those are the ones I'm primarily after. And will this rate recover their cost? Yes, it will. You got to remember there's 2 components to the cost recovery. One is electric usage, and that's what this rate is designed to recover. Then there's extension cost, which is the cost to do the initial extension. And one of the things that you have within your connection charge is an impact fee. So they would pay any impacts on infrastructure in their initial connection. Did I explain that right, Rick?
Yeah, our impact fees are targeting substation transmission, but they would be required to extend the distribution just like any other developer.
Are we gonna require a circuit study on that, Rick? So if they come into an established area, they do a circuit study?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if it's one of these monster technical things, that we definitely have to look at it.
But the way that demand works is if they have 400 kW top demand, so all 8 of the charging stations turn on once during the month at the same time, then they would pay, what's 8 times 550 in a year? Say 8 times 6 is like big demand charge, plus the energy charge. So I think we're being aggressive here at recovering our costs. I mean,
It'd be very expensive, yeah. Be like 75 cents a kilo. Go ahead.
To their customers somehow.
And what some of the newer stations are doing is they actually put a battery, and so they charge the battery when nobody's charging the car. And then they'll use that battery to help charge the car, keeps the charge to try to keep the demand low.
Keeps it for you.
Yeah,
Cuts the demand charge down. Yeah.
of course, if they get car after car after car, they're
They
gonna
never
replace the
charge.
battery and.
Somebody told me the one in Beaver, how many do they have in Beaver? And it's like,
Quite a few
they
now.
almost took down the whole system. They, well, I think they did, when they took down Beaver's entire system. Because of how much draw they were pulling on those chargers.
More of the charging station than it was for the rest of
The
the.
entire rest of the community.
Seriously?
And they wanted to double the size of the stations, because everybody's halfway between like here and, Salt Lake, they stopped at the
You should
issue.
get gas powered generator.
Yeah, that's.
So anyway. I think this is pretty aggressive, if it's recovering our costs, that's what we're doing.
That's the bottom line.
Nobody else wants to subsidize it, that's we're getting at, right?
So I think that's a goal that we should move towards having such a rate. We then need to develop the criteria of when it would be applied, which I think would primarily be a fast charger if you're above a certain KW level. Combined, then
So what you said, I don't wanna subsidize electric cars at all. They need to just pay their own. Right, that's what you're saying.
Yeah, whatever that cost, is, we need to recover that whole cost,
Yeah.
because otherwise somebody else is helping to pay that truck. No, the only thing that applies to this is just your energy tax. So they would pay that as a 6%, something like that.
Yeah, whatever.
Energy tax, whatever that rate is. Yeah, this doesn't get normal sales tax, flow that tax or anything else. It's just that energy tax rate.
I just have a couple more slides. I would just want to go through real quick to talk about what's happening around the US and it's time of use rates. And the reason utilities are doing it is to give customers more control over their bills. Because what happens is when you look at the way we charge customers, residential customers, okay. Like this utility, this is an example slide. This utility has one rate that they charge residential customers, which is about 9.5 cents, 9.5 cents kilowatt hour. But the reality is what happens with a rate structure like this is that during the evening, we're actually overcharging customers because the cost during that time is only 6 cents. But then during the peak hours of the day, we're undercharging them because the costs are 13 cents. And so what time of use allows us to do is to send this price signal to customers to give them the incentive to move off peak to save money. Now, some customers are not going to inconvenience themselves to save some money on electricity, but some customers will. And the initial response rates, when you do time of use under certain conditions with price signals, what they see is about 8 to 9% reductions during usage during these peak hours. But I'll be honest, that's not what I'm after. What I'm after is customers like that, the ones that are not going to inconvenience themselves to shift their usage. What I'm after is the customers to purchase enabling devices that allows them to conveniently shift their usage. Enabling devices can be things like setback thermostats or can be installing more efficient appliances, which would reduce their usage during these time periods typically. Or if they did purchase an electric vehicle, that it would give them the incentive to charge at night rather than during these peak hours. And by doing that, what it does is it creates a win-win. In other words, the utility saves money because the cost to provide them with electricity goes down, and the customer wins also because they reduce their bills. And when you look nationwide, this is in 2021, about 73% of customers around the US, residential customers, had AMI recording meters. And right now you don't have that, but you are considering the installation of it. And 13% of utilities in 2021 actually offered customers time of use. And 8% of the residential customers, let me change this. About 8% of the customers residential in 2021 were actually on time of use rates. These numbers are going to change a lot. I mean, over the course of the next year or two. Like you look at Michigan, Consumers Energy, they serve 1.6 million residential customers. They put all of them on mandatory time of use rates. Detroit Edison, which serves a little over 2 million residential customers, this year are putting all of their customers on time of use rates. And this is a trend that's happening around the United States, to give customers this ability to control their bills, and in a way that doesn't harm the utility but benefits the utility also. So the only reason I'm bringing this up is right now you don't have AMI, but it is something I know that you're considering. And about 5 years ago, I said that in my opinion, that utilities had about 10 years to get their technology to the point where they can actually bill time of use. And so right now that'd be like 2028. And I really think that's still on track, that you really need to be able to offer customers or bill customers time of use within the next few years. And the sooner you get started down that path, the easier it's going to be on the utility and the easier it's going to be on your customers. And I just wanted to give you some understanding of what's happening around the United States. Is there any questions about this?
I only have one comment that, on your slide there showing the cost differential, that gap is becoming narrower and narrower. In fact, like if I look at UAMP's cost today, from noon till about 3 o'clock is the cheapest time of the day. But what the time of use could help us do, we have, especially in the summer, a horrible load profile. We have such a high peak for so few of hours and time of use. If we have to buy power ahead of time in high load, which is a 16-hour block. And so if we buy it for the peak, we're way long, say at 8 o'clock in the morning. So if we can shape it to where it fits what we can buy more efficiently, there is still some price differential, but it's not as dramatic as it used to be. Or maybe if power, because of solar, becomes cheaper in the middle of the afternoon, the time of use could send that signal to them. And when it's 6 or 8 o'clock at night, when we don't want them charging their EVs, they're going to at least pay a higher price. They got to be willing to do that or change behavior to where it benefits. It can better shape our load, I guess, is how I look at it. So, and we do have it in the upcoming budget to do the first phase of AMI. It wouldn't do the whole city, and initially, but probably be a 2 to maybe 3 year period with transition. So
I really like that idea. Yeah, it kind of holds the user accountable. So they actually have control. They'll look at it like, okay, it's because of the way I'm using the electricity is why I'm paying this, as opposed to it's the city's fault why my bill is so high. And then I think it will. I'm not going to change my behavior until I can see really specifically what I need to change and why. So, yeah, I think this is a great idea.
I can tell you on the water side, it's really benefited my family also because they went to AMI meters on the water side, and you can tell usage and everything like that. And I can convince my kids they're not in a day spa and convince, you know, I can introduce them to a bar of soap instead of laying on the bottom of the shower and just hitting them with water. So, like I said, like Todd says, putting the ball in their court. I mean, we live in an information age, you know, everybody wants to know, now they have that opportunity. So, and with more and more EVs. So my wife has a plug-in hybrid car. She comes home from work at 5 o'clock, but there's no incentive to do anything different, right? And it's the worst thing for the utility, but does it matter to her? If she knew it cost her extra money to do that, she would make a choice.
Yeah.
But right now, there's nothing that says, let's wait until, you know, she can put a timer on it, plug it in right now, and it actually doesn't turn on until midnight.
Or even if she knew it was making a difference, a lot of people will do it because they know it's making a difference.
Yeah.
Helping the whatever.
But the price signal is the best way.
Yeah, the price definitely is.
We need to reinforce that, making a difference.
Are we requiring any new development to have AMI moving forward?
Well, once we make
Once we make it.
Once we pick that system, every meter will have that.
So just wanna make sure we're doing that.
So growth will push as soon as the decision is made.
Yeah.
You're about $2 million.
Yeah.
To convert the whole city,
We
which
budgeted 1 million for next year, so.
basically we'll use some of that balance where you saw that we were well over our cash balance to help fund that, but doing it all at once. We do it in pieces, it makes it easier for us to do it too, and have our staff do it kind of in between other things they're doing. Won't overwhelm us either, to do it all at once. We did it, bringing a company to do it, really. Do it all in a year.
Mark?
I got one last slide, which I think the I got the guidance I was looking for. We're looking to do a 1 year revenue neutral rate design, and we were looking for input on the rate design scenarios. And in just my feedback and what I understood, you want us to look at some frequency distributions on the residential class to give you an idea if those rate blocks are correct, what the true impact is on different customers at different usages. And then the commercial, I didn't quite catch the discussion on the commercials. And I think I didn't hear any opposition to what our initial thoughts were on the small and large commercial, which would be scenario 1 for the small and scenario 3 or 2, sorry, for the large. But I don't know if that was what was decided or if you wanted to see other alternatives on that.
I think since we got clarification on Mike's question, I don't have any questions or concerns about moving forward with what was suggested with scenario 1 and scenario 2. Scenario 1 on the small, scenario 2 on the larger.
Just keep it the same.
Increase the base rate. The base rate changes. That's likely.
I think on that, sounds like there's pretty good agreement with that approach on the commercial.
And then the commercial EV rate, if you feel comfortable, we can do the rate tariff and move forward offering that rate.
Yep.
Okay.
We're coming.
And
They're covering the cost.
Yes.
And the last thing was increasing the PCA base from 7.1 to 10 cents, which will lower the power cost adjustment, but would that get rolled into the energy rates? Again, that does not have an impact on a customer's bottom line bill. It just affects how they view their bill. Is there any concern over that recommendation?
No, we're
Um,
good.
Okay, that's all I have, and I really appreciate the time and the input that everybody has given me today, tonight, in going through this. And I appreciate you sticking with me and all those numbers I went through. So is there any other comments or any other concerns or questions?
I would just make the comment, I know Rick and his staff have spent a lot of time working on this. This is, and Mark, this is the result of many, many meetings. So I think the input today will help us get to the final product. But they put a lot of time and effort in this. A lot of care goes into these. Appreciate that.
It's just as a closing comment, is, you have a utility you should be very proud of. I mean, I know several years ago there was concerns with the sub-transmission investments that were made, but we're over that hump. Right now, you have a very, very financially stable utility that's very low debt. And other than the purchase power costs that you don't have any control over, your rates on the distribution wire side is going to be stable for several years into the future. So it's something really to be proud about, for your customers. A newer infrastructure to provide reliable electric service, and looking at the age of your infrastructure, I mean, like I said, you're in really good shape. So,
Thank you, Mark, and
Yeah.
we'll be in touch.
okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Go to bed, Mark. Go to bed.
So that would conclude the work session. And I think as far as the main item of business on the regular meeting, we're gonna defer that until we get more information, so. I'll leave it up to the power board. How much or how little. And I think we should just stay in here, can we?
Yeah, there's more in the other room, and so. Yeah, these are the-
I mean, we can approve probably ought to do the minutes at least, and then I can maybe get just a couple quick highlights. I know it's much longer than we normally do, but I do appreciate the time and
Excuse the city council.
yeah.
Don't want to stay on the power board.
So you know, burning is higher you can. Yeah.
It's not been posted that you would be here, so. you're probably better leave it.
Well, if you wanna hang out, you can.
There's only two of us.
Hey, I was here as a member of the public, I get all the pizza left.
Oh, no.
Take it to your.
Take some, will you?
Take it to my piranha kids, I do have those. I've seen these boxes somewhere already today. Is Russ. You got it. Where it says.
Dave, can you mute us?
Sure, I'm gonna put you on a break. Just make sure you say something when you want to go back to stuff.
Perfect, thank you. QR code underneath the TV.
Yeah.
Are you ready to go back? You ready to go back?
Just about.
Okay, tell me when you're ready.
Is, I need to share my screen from my laptop. What's the best way to do that in this scenario?
So what we would do is just
Oh,
right here where it says share screen. That's how you do it. It's just when you're ready for me to walk you through it, I can help you.
It is in the, I'm not zoomed in. So should I just zoom in from my laptop? I'm not zoomed in by my laptop.
But isn't what you're trying to present in your Google Drive, like in here?
It is, but I've got all my folders set up so I don't have to go in and out 30 times.
Um,
I just zoom in on this.
you do that, or you could present to the Apple TV in the other room, how you normally would. And I can pipe it back to you.
Let me just try to zoom in, if that works. I feel.
I don't know if it will work because you already zoomed in right here.
But can I unlog in on that and then just zoom? But then
No, they'll mess up the other thing.
Or will this bag it?
No, what you should do is bring up your laptop.
Okay, what?
So just have your laptop. So if you don't want to present from this actual conference room, that's fine. So what I would do is bring up on your laptop, go to, you know how you normally present to the room in the, go into the council room, like you're going to present.
I'm gonna have to side with Todd because.
Will it work clear in here?
Yes, I'll pipe it through. It'll show up on here as a, right? You see how this white where it says Water City Power Board?
Council room?
Hey, they don't need an echo chamber. They might need new leadership.
Right.
That's why we're not gonna be it.
They already know.
Do you see it?
The interview, I won't even get called.
It's a council. Kirby. Can you hear us, Dave?
I can. Things should be transitioned over now.
It looked like it grabbed the picture on the first, but that's not what my current screen is. So did I lose my mirroring?
You shouldn't have. Still showing.
This council room.
Oh yeah, you did lose it. Reconnect. There we go.
So should we just take off the new business then, if we're not gonna do it?
Yeah, they'll just approve the agenda with minus item 3. That works.
Yep.
We ready to start?
Okay, let's approve the agenda and you should be good to go.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you everyone for sticking around after that work meeting. And welcome to today's Power Board meeting. The first item on the agenda is the approving the agenda, and we do have a change to that. And we are taking item number 3, the recommendation to the city council based on the presentation that we just heard in our workspace. We're taking that off the agenda today. So with that off the agenda and the remainder of the agenda, is there any comments, questions? Do I have a
Motion to approve the agenda with removing item 3.
Okay, Todd motioned and Mark seconded. Dick, would you start us on a vote?
Aye. That's right.
Spruce eye.
Dinsmore, aye. Okay, next is the minutes. Did everyone have a chance to look through those and any questions, comments? Just to confirm, Andy didn't get lost, did he? Right?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, Todd motion, and Andy seconded, so Dick.
Saunders, aye. That was
That's right.
always a good one.
Feet up in the air.
Spruce eye.
Dinsmore, aye. Okay. So with 3 removed, we go to regular business, item number 4.
Okay, I will be really quick because anyway, just a few items to report generally. The Grapevine substation and trailhead, the drawings for the site work are basically ready to go out and bid. Alliance Consulting's been working with us on that, and Craig. We did meet with the Habitat folks yesterday on, we're relocating a part of the tortoise fence. That work will probably start hopefully in the next week or so, because we have a short window until the tortoises wake up.
I don't know, it's still snow.
Yeah, so I don't know where the alarm clock comes, but I think it's mid-May, we have to have that, and then that frees us up to have a little more flexibility on timing.
Rick, there's a lot of trucks up. Is that what the trucks up there are, or is that just someone else using?
No, we'll actually get to that
Okay.
on another one. As far as the generation, Wheeler came in and did an annual inspection. They found a few small things that were corrected, so we should be, basically, we're just getting ready to be able to run the generators this summer. Nothing huge there. This picture here, I just mostly got some pictures. This is the fun part of my job that I like, is to build things. So this is the pole just south of I-15 on Main Street, part of the interchange project with UDOT. So this pole here, the wood pole will go away and be replaced with a new steel pole without guys. And so Roost Crane came and picked it up. And so they actually lift it up and drops it down in between. So that's actually in the middle of the conductors. And then made it to the foundation. And then this is the crews, Santa Clara sent the bucket truck and a couple linemen over to help us out. So we actually had 3 buckets going at the same time. You can see there's still some old wire in between the two structures. They're starting to catch them off over here on the new steel structure. And now all the conductors are gone. And the wood pole is getting lifted out of place. So if you go over there now, it cleans it up in the area. And Mr. Johnson here has been really great to work with through that whole process. The Main Street project, the substation is coming along good. Bodeck should be done with their scope of work this week. This just showing they've got all the gravel. If you remember before, it was all muddy and tore up. And what they have left to do is some ground pads, finishing up the switch controls, and then the welded bus on the top. Our crews have got the relay panels in now into the control building. Starting the control wires now all pulled in, and so now those Jake and several others will start terminating the wire that will control things. This is the control wire they got installed. So that project's moving along fine. I think it's gonna fill up. I'd like to have it online by mid-May. I think we're on track, but it's gonna be tight to get it done. So that project's moving along. The truck's up by exit 13. We're doing a boring across I-15 that will tie in with the future Grapevine substation site, which will be by the trailhead up there. They had this piece of equipment in the area to do the bores for the I-15, and so the idea was that we would save some money on mobilization by doing this. We don't need this right now, but what they anticipated about a week project, we're into 3 weeks and a couple days, because it's been basically solid rock. And we've been in training today, so I haven't been up there today. So basically this is north looking south, and they're heading for the Grapevine commercial area on the opposite side of the freeway. And this is on the on-ramp looking back, the drill rig's right up here. They ended up having to do a bore pit here. And so the conduit's now in from here across the off-ramp and both lanes of traffic. And I'm hoping today they got the rest, and then they were gonna bore from the Grapevine property up to the bore pit. And I didn't get the pictures in here, but there's actually conduit in about 3/4 of the way now. So I'm not looking forward to get that bill on the rock.
So how big is that conduit that they put in?
There's 7 3-inch conduits that we're pulling across there. So
they're boring a big bore.
Yeah, bundled together, it's probably about a bigger.
What are they looking at, commercial or residential? Is it private on property up there?
This is commercial. This is commercial. There's the new Chipotle's, is that what's going in across so it's that area. And that's one of the main ties that this will do. Also, it'll tie up on top of
Another restaurant.
to Dick's area on the Highlands, and then up over Coral Canyon is our end goal to get all those tied. It's like where Dick lives right now. We had a cable fall and the cable feeding that whole development's out. We don't have any.
But I'd say a lot of later.
Yes, right.
Because your wife would be calling day and night.
Yeah,
Just charging the phone.
she has my number. So that's really as far, our focus really is right now is getting that sub back online before loads come up. Believe it or not, we're still waiting on the biggest Achilles heel on that. And I think we've got a plan to work around it if we have to, is some insulators that we've had on order since July of last year. They'll have them come in. They're supposed to be here later this month. So we've heard that before. They were supposed to be here in September as well, so. But we have enough that we could get it energized and work around it if we had to. Wouldn't be ideal, but we can make it work. Really, as far as just the UAMP side of things, if you're interested, I'm actually kind of moving on to item 5, if that's all right, unless you got questions. The UAMPS toolkit is April 19th from noon to 4 p.m. over at the Red Lion down here. If you're able to make that, you should have got an email from UAMPS. If not, let me or Rachel know and register for that. If you can, that's great. And then kind of put a star in August, the UAMPS annual meetings in Jacksonville, Wyoming on August 13th and 16th. If you're able to make that, just give us a little heads up if you think you will. Not home to you at this point. There's some fun activities they do up there. Todd went up 3 years, 4 years ago, whatever it's been. That's a fun one. Wholesale market purchase, we bought a little bit more power for April to September of this year. And are working on securing power into 2024. And we're looking, and UAMPS is looking to try to do a longer term purchase for like another 5-year type purchase. But most of the counterparties right now aren't willing to make offers that far out. So they may take the approach of maybe asking for a 2 or a 3-year product. So we're monitoring that situation. One really good news for the Payson Nebo project, which is our largest ownership project we're in, they were able to secure gas for this summer for a real attractive price, which would put us about $50 a megawatt hour. And they're also working to try to get a 5-year longer term gas purchase for that project. And the other thing that's been done there is the PMC's decided basically to turn that more or less into for the most part, a base load plant that's running 24/7, 7 days a week. They call it the sweet spot, where they don't have to do the duct burner about 110, and then during high load periods they can turn on the duct burner and get up to about 100. That should help our overall power cost situation, at least for the next 6 months, and if we can get a longer term purchase, that'll at least give us a known instead of being exposed to gas pricing. I think if we get a 5-year gas purchase, I don't think it's going to be in the $3.30 that we got this summer, because it would be a year-long product, so you're going to pay more because you're going to have gas across the winter as well. So they're going to live out their pricing. And another good thing that UAMPS did, and this was sent out to you, and for the most part on a lot of things, I think I'll let, if they continue to do this, I will try to get this out to you earlier and let this be a lot of your UAMPS reports. The carbon-free project, main thing there is we're on target for the colas in the middle, and all that keeps progressing well. We've had quite a bit of discussion on this incentive plan potential to try to get people to come in earlier than later. They haven't worked out all the details. We kicked around a lot of ideas, so I don't know what that might look like. And then we're actually going to meet with a couple of the prospective participants to see if what we were thinking about doing would actually encourage them to do it or discourage them to do it. We don't want to send the wrong signal. So in a couple of weeks, we'll have the UAMPS meetings, and I guess if you're, the UAM's meetings will be over at the Red Lion this month, so if you're looking for
Excitement.
some real excitement on Tuesday and Wednesday, 18th and 19th, you're welcome to visit. The rest of the projects, not a lot going on the St. George project. One really good thing is we actually are getting energy from the Red Mesa Solar Project now. Unfortunately, that's the smaller of our two solar projects. But it is, the one nice thing I've noticed so far, it started about March 15th, somewhere around there. Is you pretty well know when it comes up and when it's gonna go away. And there was a couple days in there, you could see where the storms went across, that it was only about half of what the output is on a sunny day. And so it has some of that, the solar pattern, but that was great to see that. Our Steel Solar project, they're still struggling to get panels into the country, the ones that they had planned on using in particular. So they're looking at alternate panel sources. They have to modify some of the racking they've already installed if they go to different suppliers, so they weren't overly thrilled at having to do that, but they're looking at different options. So that was supposed to be online the fourth quarter of this year. I'm guessing right now we'll be lucky to see a first quarter of next year. So, the inverters are all up there. The racking materials are there. I mean, not physically, when I went up to Idaho to visit family, stop by. The stuff's there except for the panels, basically. So, other than that, I mean, there's, when you get these reports, there'll be some like the Hunter project that we're not part of, but it is interesting reading, you know, with the regional haze and some of the stuff going on there. I think it's good to be aware of what's going on, even though it's a project that we're not directly involved with. It affects the available power in the area. And then we're also looking at getting, as a group, MEG stands for Member Internal Generation, like we have. And so as a group, we're looking at trying to get a longer term gas purchase for those as well. So that would create some more certainty on what those pricing. So instead of trying to chase the last cent and not knowing what that price is going to be, we better have a price going into it. Again, already covered Payson. Our power costs for February we're trending in the right way. It's still about I think $107 a megawatt hour, but it's a lot better than 140, 160 I've seen. So still pursuing the Zion Solar, and that one's a 2028 projection right now due to transmission. The Sunnyside is a waste coal, which would be a shorter term PPA. We turned in a potential participation in that at about a 2 megawatt level, not a real big one, but it might help fill a little bit of a gap. It's, I think, projected to be in the mid 70s as far as pricing. And San Juan, we're not in. Vale's been running well, other than we have, I didn't look this morning, but last few days, Kern River's been down, I'm thinking for maintenance. So if they aren't compressing gas, we don't have any waste heat to generate from. So that's a real quick report, and I very much appreciate time, and if you know, on the rate stuff, if you've got, you know, things, if you're like me, you know, things will rattle through and come up, send me an email, give me a call. Say, what about this, or what do you think about that? Look at that, so.
Hey, no, thank you, thank you. Any questions? Comments, concerns?
So you'll just send us out information as far as when you put things together.
Yeah, I will, it's gonna take, I think, a little bit of time to gather that, but I'll work with Jeremy if he feels like it's something we ought to do. Or next month's meeting, again, like I said, because of how the PCA works and what we're proposing, the actual, you know, revenue to the department isn't really getting changed, so. I don't, like I say, I'd rather make sure everybody's comfortable, if there's a couple of better options to look at, let's do that. And go from there. I know Rachel and utilities have been getting a few calls on the PPA. It's definitely caught people's eye with the, you know, that it's been up. They do a good job. And get ones that are more upset will raise it to different people. They still don't like what we have to say, but give them a sounding board at least. And I understand their frustration. I wish I had an easier way to. So. But like I say, we're seeing some of the things we're doing to try to turn those costs the other way and not at least be quite as volatile as we've been exposed to.
Good.
To adjourn?
Make a motion that we adjourn. I'll second.
Motion, Mark seconded.
Squared eye.
That's right.
Saunders on.
Dinsmore, aye. Okay. Next month.
Oh, I lied, and Vail just came up for half output this afternoon, so. Yeah. Go in again.
So Rick, I got a question. So